Turn 0? Okay, okay, okay. Right, it was a league match. Okay. Turn 0. All right, let's get into it. Uh, okay. So, we're reviewing a game that was submitted as a channel point reward by Crazy Penguin. This is a game where Crazy Penguin plays against Los. It's for the 5D Chess League. And Crazy is white, Los is black. And that's all the information we have. No other context. So let's just jump into it here. All right, here we go. We're off to the races with E3. E3, there's been a lot of talk about E3 lately in the Discord. I personally am not an E3 player. E3 leads to incredibly sharp positions, incredibly tricky. It's a very aggressive opening, especially against knight f6 d5. Black is sort of immediately on the back foot. You can fianchetto this bishop and sort of develop all of your pieces, and there's a lot of brutal crackdown directly and immediately onto f6, f7. And it's kind of really scary to play against. Similarly, it does... I mean, a good offense is sort of a good defense in 5D chess. But also, it's not super free. I think that it opens up a few like positional weaknesses. Obviously, you have to defend against the f7 sec, and there are situations where if white responds with e6, then it can be really tricky to play knight f3. This is what we were talking about in the Discord earlier. Because after queen f6, it's all but impossible for white to prevent black's sack onto f2 on t0. So it can get tricky. Neat says e3, e6 is the best opening. For whom? What is your metric? I think that's quite a claim, and I'm not positive that I agree. But certainly it leads to interesting games. Anyway, let's see what happens. Okay, knight f6 happens. This is how I respond to e3 myself. Speaks for itself. Knight f6. It's an opening as old as turn 0 itself. You prevent the travel on the f file. You know, it's just solid, right? And it leaves you open to push whatever pawns you like. In response, knight f3 happens, which is usually how this starts. Makes sense. We're not going to delve too deeply into that. And then c5. Immediately, we get some sauce. c5. c5 is interesting here. What does c5 do? It doesn't enable... The thing is, in this position, you can sort of force a move out of... Well, not really. I mean, white started with e3, so it's not like you can ever bring your queen out to b6 and threaten the f2 travel or anything like that. It is interesting, though. I mean, c5 is very interesting. I suppose it takes away the central square. Then again, white doesn't really care too much for d5 in this position anyway. But what it does mean is that if white plays c3 next turn, hoping to queen b2 for a sack onto f7, white can reply with c4. Then again, playing c3 to force c4 out of your opponent doesn't seem like the worst move in the world. Then again, playing c3 does prevent you from fianchettoing your bishop, so that also doesn't seem fantastic. But c5 is interesting here. I mean, it's Los, and so he plays some unorthodox stuff, but this was a tourney game, so it's not like he's messing around. c5 is interesting. It takes a lot of space. It maybe plays into white's plans of fianchettoing this bishop anyway. And it weakens this diagonal because now you can't push the d pawn. So you either have a knight on triagonal duty, or you kind of push up this structure like b5, which seems pretty insane. So I'm not sure that I like it. It doesn't sound very sound. Wait, is this the 1.5 tourney game? No, this is Crazy's game against Los in the league. But let's keep going. Let's just see what happens. Okay, knight c6 makes sense, but sorry. I got carried away. Knight c6 is the next move. That's knight c3. Sorry. Okay, c5 is met with c4, which makes sense. Because again, this d pawn is probably going to stay here forever anyway, and you want to frappuccino this bishop, and this allows you to do that. I like this position for white. I think this kind of plays into white's hands. Because actually, ordinarily, if you get, like, this kind of transposes into another game that I've seen with relative infrequency, to be honest, because people just don't play c-pawn openings very often. But knight f3, knight f6, c4, c5 is a game that I've seen and played a few times. So I don't know. Andre says that c3 looked interesting because f7 remains a weakness. Yeah, that's why I thought c3 looked interesting. C3 basically forces c4. I mean, or, you know, you get like a queen out or whatever. But then after queen here, you force the trade, which I think is better for white anyway. And if c4 happens in response to c3, then, you know, you just activate your queen. You know, you attack this pawn, which also enables like an attack onto f7, and that pawn is now on c4 overextended, so it's difficult to defend. c4 just gets taken by the bishop. You make a good point, Andre. You make a good point. Immediate c4 does get captured by the bishop. Yeah, c3 is interesting. c3, queen b6, b4 is possible also, I think. With what goal in mind? So let's see. Here, c3, queen b6, b4. What's the goal? b4 to play queen b3 next. Okay. You don't get a turn one sack, though, right? Like it's mistimed for that. But you do get an attack onto f7. f7 travels to later boards are still scary, you think? Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, before any pawns have moved and the knight's out. Yeah, no, it can still be scary, especially with the knight, you know. There's always exile strats, but, you know, notwithstanding that. Yeah, because here, like, you get to travel to here and this knight's already out, but also your queen is already out. So there are, like, you know, it's like queen here and then king takes, and then you have, like, maybe queen check here or something like that. I don't know. Or maybe, like, knight out this turn. I don't know. There are ideas. Anyway, let's keep going. Or maybe not as scary. I mean, I don't think they're as scary for sure. But under certain circumstances, I think that there's some spookiness. Especially like if your knight is already out here. The funny thing is, if knight f3 had been played first, well, okay, so if you sack onto this board f7, then, you know, king takes and you have a check, and then king moves, and then you have another check, and then your queen probably doesn't get there in time still. So I don't know. Let's not get distracted, okay? Let's keep going. C4's been played. Yeah, like I was saying, knight f3, knight f6, c4, c5, e3 is like a game that I've seen a decent number of times. And I think it's probably good for white. So let's just keep going. Let's just keep going. Sorry. C4, knight c6. I think that makes sense. Especially if you're really tempted to activate your light square bishop, right? You got to push the d pawn, and before you do that, you got to cover this triagonal preemptively. Because having to do that, like locking yourself into that next turn, is maybe exploitable by the white player. So we're just developing our pieces, covering this triagonal preemptively. I think it looks good. What's next? Knight c3, h6. Okay. Sorry. I keep misreading this notation. Okay, knight c3 is what happens, and then h6 is the response to that, which I agree is a good prophylactic move. Okay, hold on. Right, so here, this position is one that I've seen a bunch, like the sort of 4 knights c4 position. I think that it makes for really interesting games. I think that games that start like this tend to have like every piece quite active in the action, because it's like easy to fianchetto this bishop. These knights see a ton of play, and you don't have to worry about this quadrigonal very much if the d2 pawn stays put. And so I think that these games are really fun. I mean, there's hardly any asymmetry to speak of here, so actually we can't... I don't think it's worth saying very much about the position. I think it looks solid for both players. Here h6 was played, which I agree with. It never hurts to play. It never hurts to play an early h6. Obviously, you want to take away squares for the knight to hop in. In games where e3 happens, taking away these squares for the knight is actually pretty crucial, because, you know, there are just such lethal combinations once all the pieces are set up that you want to prevent. So I think that h6 here makes a lot of sense. It can hurt, actually. Seems fine in this position. But apparently your mileage may vary with h6. Let's keep going. h3 in response, same idea. Wow, almost symmetric board. If e6 is played here, I'm going to lose my mind. a6 is played. Okay. Fair enough. You want to take more squares away from the knight. I think that knight d5 here is actually a bit of an issue. Maybe not so much of an issue, especially because after like e6, knight takes, queen takes f6, you can't exactly set up the Frappuccino very safely. You have to like maneuver this rook over, and it's kind of clumsy before you have this situation set up. But at least in a moment here, certainly post Frappuccino, pressuring this knight is how I lose this position a lot. Like, these knight outposts are how I lose this position a lot as black. Not here, like a Lexi g6 ideas can happen. Yeah. I won't go down that rabbit hole, I think, but there are certainly ideas like that. Okay, a6 takes away b5 from this knight, which I think is helpful. Then again, after e6, knight out here, well, it's a little bit spooky because you're putting pressure on this knight, but you still probably want a Frappuccino first, and it's still probably worth doing, because it's not like this knight is ever going to capture, or this pawn is ever going to capture this knight, because it opens up the diagonal. So I don't know. Let's see. So far, very solid play from both players. Everyone is respecting space. There's social distancing happening. Everyone's on their own half of the board. Only two pieces in the middle, two ranks. So I'm not going to dwell on this position too much. A3 happens. Of course it does. All right. Okay. We have a move. We have a move. After a3, we have rook b8. You might ask yourself, why? Why does black bother wasting their time here with rook b8? I know that because I also am tempted to ask the same question. Well, it enables this pawn push, and after like takes, the rook recaptures. So maybe an early critique of this structure is imminent for black. Then again, with these outposts kind of taken away from this knight, there isn't too much, because this pawn wants to push up so that this bishop can frappuccino anyway, right? So I think after this, like, yeah, you can push, but then you just semi-open your file after retakes with a takes b4. I don't really know about all this. Rook b8 seems unnecessary before any of your bishops are in the game. I think I would have liked to see e6 before that. Also, you've got this bishop, so if like the b5 push happens, this pawn is protected. You don't need to do this before you can frappuccino your own bishop. Queen c2 looks tempting now. Queen c2 does look tempting now. And then bishop d3. Yeah. Yeah, the idea is that you form sort of like a queen bishop battery, which can be really lethal. In a lot of these positions where you've got e3, this is like a theme that you'll see really frequently. Andrei's partial to it himself. Because you just throw in a piece here, you sack, and then there's kind of like a Tchaikovsky situation, or maybe you like hop in with the knight. I mean, in this case, not really an option on e5, but you know, you throw some pieces into the mix, you push a bishop in just to, you know, to force the king out or maybe away. You sack the bishop in, and then you go back with the queen to a board where you have like a queen, bishop, queen battery lined up, and it just destroys. Or just f5 travel with the knight. Always an option. Always an option. It's really scary. This is why like this structure is terrifying to play against as black. I know, I've been on the receiving end of it quite a few times. And that moves like queen c2 are the reason that rook b8 seems like it doesn't do very much. You don't get a lot of bang for your buck. Let's keep going. This isn't the longest game. That's why I'm sort of really taking my time here, so that we get our money's worth. Okay, so what happens? Bishop d3 happens. Close. No reason that queen c2 should happen before bishop d3. Although queen c2 is a more flexible move. You usually want to take this bishop off of its home square. I mean, if I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. The bishop does a lot of work on its home square. A lot more than, you know, it may first seem. Maybe even better order. Possibly. I mean, there isn't like... The problem is that the black pieces aren't mobilized in a way that actually can sort of capitalize on the bishop leaving first. But... I don't know. I don't like it. I don't like it. Let's leave it at that. I like queen c2 first, but that's just me. Bishop d3 happens, and in response, g6. Now queen c2 looks juicy, right? Because now you line up a little bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes mate. And if bishop takes and anything else happens, then you just sack into here, and then you Tchaikovsky, or you do a knight travel, what have you. It looks concerning, to say the least. G6 makes sense, I guess. Well, the thing is that G6 doesn't add a defender. You know what I mean? Um, after queen c2, rook g8. Right, right. Let me think. Let me think. Let me think. Let me consider that order real quick. G6 first, then rook G8. What's the alternative? Then onto this board. Sack, queen out, queen travel, queen bishop. So then like takes, which isn't necessarily takes with the rook, and then takes, and then something else happens, and then queen out isn't lethal. I don't know why, but I really want to play e6 in this position. But maybe g6 is better to immediately address this and then pull the rook over. That must be what he was thinking, right? White can add another attacker with knight h4. True. That does open up this knight to go. Yeah, that's what Andre said as well. That opens this up. The thing is that here, I mean, I wish that this bishop was already frappuccinoed. Because in that situation, like what g6 does here is weaken f6, right? Especially because e6 hasn't been pushed yet, so so maybe you collapse. Maybe you collapse on the position. Maybe here you play knight d5. Yeah? Maybe that just allows e6 on the spot, and that's not fantastic after you trade and go here. Yeah, probably not yet. You probably want a frappuccino before that happens. But then if rook g8 happens, then the frappuccino isn't exactly all it's cracked up to be. Then again, it does enable you to probe f6. Okay, so I think probably here the game plan must be that you fianchetto and then you push your knight out, right? Because if takes and there's nothing on f6, then you're like elated, even if you're not like skewering this rook or whatever. Because either e6 is pushed or it's not. And if you've got the two pieces that are attacking f6, then... Well, the thing is that it allows bishop frappuccino to defend f6, but if the bishop frappuccino happens, then there's not a rook that sees g6. So maybe the game plan is bishop g7 and then rook f8. That's probably the plan. Right? Does that hold up to the attacks on g6? I think that it does. This is probably safe for black. Bishop g7, rook f8, e6. Seems decent. Actually, knight d5, then knight f4 can be a plan. Knight d5, then knight f4. That's a good point. If you've got a knight on f4 and a knight on h4, then this pawn is getting pretty sweaty, especially if bishop g7 has been played. This is a really complex position. It's actually really hard to tell. It's hard to tell who's better here. I think that white still has some very dangerous attacking opportunities. But let's just keep going. Let's see what happens in the game. Let's see. Bishop g3 happened, then g6 happened. Okay, we see knight d5 immediately. The response, if I had to guess, would be e6, right? You just defend the... I don't really see what else you could do. I mean, you've got bishop g7, which you probably wanted to play anyway, or you've got e6. I think that e6 is better because it kicks the knight and it forces him to do this immediately. So I think that this knight d5 here is probably premature. I don't think that you have enough pieces in the game yet. Queen c2, rook g8, knight d5, e5, knight f4. Okay. Queen c2, rook g8, knight d5, e5. You probably meant e6, knight f4. Because also, why would you play knight f4 if e5 happens? Probably move order doesn't really matter here. Yeah, no, he meant e5. Or sorry, he meant e6. I think I misspoke there, but what I mean is that he meant e6, not e5. Yeah, okay. I think I said that he meant e4 instead of e5, but anyway, you get what I mean. Okay, I think that this is premature. Maybe by one move, maybe you wanted your queen out first or to frappuccino this bishop. But listen, it happens. And the response is actually e6, which makes sense. Okay, in response, queen c2. Now, to me, this seems out of order. But maybe it doesn't matter, because what is black actually going to do? Not recapture here, right? Because then, I mean, here, and then you take here, and then that's like a nightmare for the black pieces. So actually, I think that Crazy's probably got the right idea. I was critical of this move order, but it only matters for like traveling purposes, and I don't think that you're ever going to go to any of these boards anyway. So maybe it's just as well. Gordian Tangle says, just got here. What is the setup? Welcome. Right now we're reviewing a game. We're reviewing a game played by Crazy Penguin against Los in the 5D Chess League, which he submitted for review as a channel point reward. We're like, we're just sinking our teeth into this game. IDK, I don't see how black defends g6 anyway. It's a difficult setup. Thanks, no prob. All right. G6 is quickly becoming a problem. Well, I mean, how does black ever actually kick this knight? The thing is, I'm not positive. I mean, I know what black could have done differently. It's not play rook b8. That seems pretty sketch. Activate more of their pieces here. If you got this bishop frappuccino and you played f8 already, then maybe it's a different story. Alternatively, then again, it's not like you're gonna castle long with this setup. Maybe this bishop frappuccino was critical. I always feel like it is. I feel like whoever frappuccinos first has an advantage. But there isn't really time to make all the moves. Here, I don't know about queen c2. Andre, literally, that was your line. That was the line that you said, but instead of knight d5 first, you had queen c2 first. A bit of unnecessary complications. I mean, I agree that this knight move was premature, but on the other hand, I don't see how black kicks this knight, right? You can't open up the file. If you take here, then C takes d5 is like an absolute nightmare. Because again, can't open up the file, and now this knight is kicked. Where the hell does it go? It has actually no squares. Then again, it has here, but you know, knight on the rim gets fucked. That's what they say. Here, why not knight f4 first? That's a good question. If your goal is to get to knight f4 anyway, I think probably, because I think that the plan of collapsing onto g6, unless you're incredibly familiar with the position, isn't your first instinct. I mean, you want to, like, there's nothing that black can do anyway to kick this knight. So I actually don't feel too bad. I think that you were right when you said order doesn't matter here. Although, okay, can't really take that knight here. That's what I'm saying. Okay. This is quickly shaping up to be really dangerous. And again, after knight f4, what do? I mean, you can't push the E or G pawns, right? And then knight h4 is coming, and suddenly g6 falls, even with this rook here. And then next stop is f7. Potential Tchaikovsky as well. Okay, let's keep going. How does Los deal? How does Los deal? Where are we here? Queen c2, rook g8, as expected. You gotta defend g6. All of the pieces are lining up here. I mean, even if you didn't see that, like, a priori, that is what this battery generally telegraphs, that there's about to be some business on g6, right? It is on site with this pawn. So rook g8, kind of the only move. You got a billion pieces staring down g6. You had a defender, right? I mean, that's just what you do. Okay. Now, in this position, I would expect either knight f4 or knight h4. Both add pressure onto this. Like, ordinarily, like, if you're worried about opening up the f file, which you really shouldn't be, because black doesn't have any active pieces that can actually take advantage of that anyway, then you can just play knight f4 first. And if you play knight f4 first, probably what happens is bishop d6, right? So maybe you do want to play knight h4 first, because opening up the f file, like, your opponent's not going to be able to capitalize. Honestly, another candidate move is probably just b3. But I mean, taking 2 turns, when you can collapse on g6 with both of the knights, I think that frappuccinoing the bishop maybe is like a tempo too expensive. Knight h4 allows knight e5, and then black can take out the bishop. Good point. So, well, I mean, riddle me this, Andre. After knight f4, what do you do after bishop g6? I guess just knight h4? But then, aren't you worried? To me, it's not so clear. Well, it's clear that white's winning here, but why not knight takes g6? I mean, you're probably right. When you're right, you're right, Andre. I just wanted to have both knights on f4 and h4 before you pushed into here. But I mean, you're right, because there are only 2 defenders, right? And if you've got 3 attackers, then you can just go to town. So you know what? I'm overthinking things. You don't need both of the knights. That's overkill. You're right. Instead of knight f4, which seems pretty lethal here, I don't quite understand how black defends g6. We get g3. Okay, it's a bit of a head scratcher. Not too lethal. Seems like white doesn't have too much trouble converting. Lethal for g6 pawn, though. In any case, g3 is played. Now you might ask yourself, why? Why is g3 played? I'm not sure. You know, okay, so my first thought was, okay, no, because even then it doesn't make too much sense. Okay, g3 is clearly a prophylactic move here, right? But against what? That's a good question. I don't know the answer myself. Maybe the thought was, if knight f4, bishop d6, and it wasn't clear that this collapse onto g6 actually has materialized yet. And you can't recapture the f4 knight if the bishop takes on f4 with the e3 pawn, so you wanted a pawn on g3. Well, I guess to prevent counterplay along the g file. I mean, that's a safe bet. You did remove the defender of the g pawn, so that's safe. Maybe there were plans to castle, which seems sus. But hey, g3. Okay, the reason that it's unclear that if you were to say, if b3 had happened with the idea of frappuccinoing this bishop, getting the sniperino into his nest, I wouldn't have batted an eye. That makes all the sense in the world to me. And I might say, okay, maybe you just want to play positionally because you don't understand that, you know, you might think, oh, well, there are 2 attackers and 2 defenders. And I mean, backwards knight moves are always difficult to spot, and you don't just want to open up the file willy-nilly without pushing g3. So maybe, like, in some ways, this enables knight h4, although knight h4 enables knight e5 to hop in here and both cover g6 and kick the bishop. But you know what? We got to roll with it, right? We got to roll with it. G3 happened. I think that B3 and knight f4 were preferable moves. But we got G3. So let's see what happens. Let's see what Los comes up with. Los plays knight d4. Okay. Knight d4 is interesting. I mean, okay, here, what are the anisotropies, or the asymmetries, rather, in the position? I mean, it may look like, okay, if knight d5 was a good idea for white, then why is knight d4 a good idea for black, right? Or why shouldn't knight d4 be a good idea for black? Well, the answer is that white's got like a battering ram charging straight along this diagonal onto g6. And black has spent 2 tempi moving his rooks to respectively b8 and g8. So it doesn't seem fantastic. I mean, here you can take with the knight potentially, because by playing g3 you've removed this pawn from g2, and so knight takes f3 is an option, but then pawn recaptures, and then you capture, or like you push or something, but then takes, but then you don't care if this knight moves out. You can retake. I mean, even like the naive response doesn't seem that bad. Like your sanity check whenever you put a minor piece in front of a pawn must be like, okay, well, how do I capitalize, right? And it doesn't seem that bad. Because you can take with the pawn, right? And even then, after like recaptures or whatever, you can either recover the diagonal with the bishop, or you can check, and then, well, you probably don't want to check first, but you can just play, like, this knight is off of c6, so you can just play, you can just take with the pawn, and then whatever happens, you don't even have to do it next turn. You can do it in 2 turns. So even if black plays a move that's like necessary for white to respond to or whatever, I don't know, like something nuts, like knight out here or something like that, knight f4, like white can afford after pawn takes, like knight f4, h takes f4, white can afford to play knight e5 to cover the diagonal. You have 2 turns to cover this diagonal. This seems sus. This seems like all it does is provide like a really annoying square. Like it gives this knight an outpost basically, and you know you're not gonna, because of the c5 opening, like you're never gonna move this d pawn, right? So it locks down this pawn, but also it gives white a knight outpost here. Maybe like bishop d6 happens eventually to prevent that, but it also just straight up seems to lose a piece. I don't know. Okay, very questionable. I think that just taking this is actually fine. And I mean, it's got to be responded to immediately, obviously, because it attacks the queen here, but I don't see how black converts. I mean, I guess the idea is maybe like, I don't know. It seems like maybe the idea is pawn takes and then bishop d6, and then you can't play knight e5. Although if pawn takes and then bishop d6 happens, then you just have bishop e4 covers the diagonal. It certainly seems like a positional advantage for white, even if it's like even material. So I don't really get it. But anyway, let's keep going. So what is Crazy's response in game? It's queen d1. Queen d1 seems sus. It seems... I mean, listen, it's a tournament game. You're spooked, right? There's a piece on your side of the board. It's attacking your queen. You don't feel comfortable opening up any diagonals here. Knight takes seems like it opens up f2. So, you know, what do? You run the piece away that's being threatened, which is most valuable, and you cover f3. Queen is a paid actor. Something like that. I understand. I think that you can capture here with impunity, win a piece, and that this structural like weakness that looks like it's opened up isn't actually a thing that's happened. That's just me. Let's keep going. Okay, queen d1 is interesting. Now black maybe is given a moment. Black maybe now is given a moment where they can take back the momentum, right? My mans, I was going up against someone 200 elo higher than me. I was very spooked. No, I get that. I get that. That's fair. And this is kind of like in that situation. I mean, if that's like the storyline, then this is kind of like, or maybe unpaid. That's funny. Intern actor. This is like higher elo privilege. Because a move like this seems unsafe, and you're like, oh, but he's so good. He wouldn't just give up a piece. So you just run away, even though you should not believe him, right? Because I have trouble doing that too. It's like the game that I played a little bit earlier on stream where my opponent like gifted me a knight on g4, and I was like, there's no way that this isn't poisoned. Like how can I possibly, you know? But sometimes you just gotta say, listen, if they have it, they have it. If this works, then I'll learn from it. I just need to not believe them, and the burden of proof is on my opponent, right? But it seemed okay. So how as black do you take advantage of this position? Taking here seems pretty bad because if anything, that position is worse for you than the one that you tried to get yourself out of. I mean, this bishop is now undefended, so like in a turn, you could take this bishop 2 turns in the past, and it would check this king. it smothers this king. Sorry, I was thinking of. I had a crazy moment where I thought that if a knight captures this bishop in the past, somehow it becomes both a bishop and a knight, which would be a scary piece. But that's not what happens. No, but it checks the king and it forces the king to move. But I don't know if that actually gains you very much. Well, okay, let's think here. Listen, okay, hold on. Let's hypothetical. If this knight goes back to this board, then and captures this bishop, which wouldn't happen next turn. It would happen the turn after. So this knight's got to survive that long. But I mean, if your opponent didn't take it in that situation, then your opponent's probably not going to take it afterwards, so you probably don't have to worry about it, right? If there's a knight here on this board that checks this king, only move is out here. There probably isn't. You don't have enough active pieces for there to be like a lethal combination. Even though with this queen and this bishop out of the way, you have very little in the way of, you know, you have very little in the way of pieces that defend. But you only have 2 turns to actually materialize that before the present catches up. So probably there isn't enough going on here for an actual like forced mating sequence or anything like that. Right. Looks scary, but I don't exactly see the continuation. Yeah, I agree. First your wins work for your elo, then your elo works for your wins. Yeah, something like that. Well said, Andre. The rich get richer, man. Fucking capitalism. I don't see the continuation, but it looks spooky. Maybe if instead of moving these rooks over, the black player had, you know, developed more pieces, then that might be super scary. But anyway, what do you do here as black? I don't know that you want a Frappuccino. The bishop. Maybe if you're working toward that idea. Well, could Frappuccino this bishop? Because this knight is actually super annoying. So maybe you play like b6 here. Maybe you play b5 here. Remove the defender of this knight. That way you can capture here, especially with this queen. Okay, I think b5 maybe is the play. Let's see what happens in game. b5 happens in game, my man. Makes a lot of sense. Let me take this opportunity to smite this bot real quick. There we go. Easy clap. This is the outlier. Maybe even queen f1 after knight e4. Maybe. How does the queen get to f1? Sorry. Wait, what are you talking about? How does queen f1 happen? I'm so confused. Because in that situation, king f1 has to happen. If we're talking about the travel. Anyway, b5 happens. Counterplay is attempted, trying to break through. If you take this pawn, if you remove this pawn, then suddenly knight takes here. Seems attractive. You're breaking up in the center. You enable a bishop Frappuccino if this knight is gone, and things are looking good. Lol, I meant knight e4 after king e1. I was thinking knight e4 because then you've got these 3 knights and it looks fucking insane. My brain mixed up everything. Yeah, no worries. I think that the obvious follow-up is knight e4 because then you've got these 3 knights here and that just looks crazy. But then I don't see the continuation after that. If you had just like one more piece, like what, bishop here or here, or like a queen, or I don't know. I don't quite see how you convert. Okay. So, b5 happens. Looks scary. How the fuck do you respond to this? As white. That's a good question. This is going to get taken no matter what. The response is probably bishop. Like, if b takes c4, you probably have bishop takes c4. That doesn't feel very good. There's an argument to be made, I think, for b3. Enables Frappuccino, defended by the queen. I mean, you can still just take here. The only problem is after it takes here with tempo, you kind of have to respond, and this becomes trickier to play. I don't like it with the intent of taking on f2, but then queen e1 actually. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, if king f1, then queen e1 defends f2. So I don't think that the travel works. It seems a little spooky. Seems a little spooky. Maybe just take with the knight here. I don't know. I mean, honestly, probably knight f4 is fine here, right? Probably just knight f4, yeah? Because, like, you're gonna ram through... Oh, no, you can't do that anymore because your queen's not on c2. It's on d1. Probably b3. Probably b3. Okay, what actually happens? Knight e5. Knight e5 was played next in the game. What? Okay, you add an attacker to g6. You pressure f7. Not that there are any Tchaikovsky ideas that I can see, really. Maybe if this bishop was frappuccinoed, there'd be a little bit more of... There'd be a little bit more play there. Maybe the idea is to play f4 next. Then again, without a queen over there... I mean, okay, so fair enough, because how does black kick the e5 knight, right? Because this is the price you pay for jumping in d4, which was super sketch, by the way. It also kind of preemptively closes up the diagonal, right? This queen is so sad. It was so happy on c2. In some sense, maybe this allows you to capture with the pawn here, and after it takes, I don't know, maybe bishop e4 or something, or maybe queen e2, right? And takes queen e2. It's like the idea. I mean, listen, another attacker on g6 seems good. Another attacker on f7 seems good. Yeah, it's not so bad. In any case, I think that the idea of, like, continuing to collapse on the king side here and not actually worrying about this feels pretty good. Man, you really want to get this knight out of here because, like... I mean, if queen f3 was an option, then you would be ecstatic in this position, right? But this knight's just a real pain in the dick. So in this position, what if just takes, and maybe after takes... Yeah, bishop e4. No, sorry. Takes, and then after takes, you have check, queen out here. Oh, and then you can't play knight e5. Because you get mated. What if takes, queen out, takes... takes bishop e4? I don't really know. You know what? Let's keep going. Let's see what happens in the game. Wow, knight f4. Oh, sorry. I messed up. Knight f5 is what I meant to say. Yeah, knight e5 go, and then 5D chess notation so difficult to read. Okay, the knight backs the fuck up. Okay, so in this situation, Los recognizes that A, g6 is now a target with all these pieces staring it down. B, my knight can actually get taken with impunity, especially with a knight here blocking the diagonal, so that's not an option. A concession is made by black here that is meaningful, but also relatively spooky. Uncovers f3. No knight cube. Somewhere Eric Rosen. I know, we were so close. Look at this. What a gift knight e4 would have been in this position, but alas. Got some real Barbie horse adventures going on here. Yeah, something like that. Oh man. These knights are running rampant. I think that this is a massive positional concession for black, and white should be super happy. They're like, oh, okay, I guess I can just go in. Okay, white's going to go deep. Like we were just saying, it would be fantastic in this position if queen f3 is possible. We got a knight L instead. That is the way that the knight moves. So there is something satisfying about that, right? Pretty good. Pretty decent. Queen f3 happens, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, we said just a second ago that this knight here was really cramping our style because queen f3 is like a dream move. Bishop takes f5 seems strong. I agree, and that's actually the move that I was looking at myself. You obviously can't take with this pawn, so then you take with the g pawn. And now, how are you ever kicking this knight? After knight takes, queen takes, suddenly there are like queen h4 shenanigans. Since f7 is always defended by this knight. So like bishop takes, pawn takes, right? So an example line is maybe like bishop takes f5, g takes f5, knight takes f6, queen takes f6, and then we have queen h5 preparing a travel onto the board right after this move happens, and a queen here is just mate, right? Because which way to recapture? Exactly. Oh, you were thinking immediate knight takes f7? That could happen too, right? If recapture like this, knight f7, and suddenly if king here, then queen h5, arguably more direct, but... Oh, wait, no, sorry. Because if... both kind of work, right? I removed the defender of h5 first, whereas Andre prefers to, like, force this first. Yeah, and then knight f6. Yeah, so, like, if knight f7... Yeah. That's a cleaner line, right? So we have bishop takes f5, g takes f5, then you have knight takes f7, and then if knight recapture, or if king doesn't recapture, then you win a queen. If king does recapture, then you have knight takes f6, then queen has to recapture, otherwise he can get mated. You know, like in a turn due to like double check or something crazy. Or actually it threatens knight h7 mate, so it's like must be recaptured, and recapturing with the king is obviously like death. So so again, in that line, pawn recaptures, knight takes, and then king has to take, otherwise you lose queen, and then knight takes f6, and then queen has to take, otherwise knight h7 is mate, and then because this pawn is gone and you delayed a turn with the knight check here, queen h5 becomes mate. So that's a very good line. I found a chattier line in the end. All right, let's see what happens. Hey, Los. We're reviewing a game that Crazy submitted. This is a game where you played him in the league, actually. So we have both participants in the chat here. Yeah, bishop takes f5 here, I think, is absolutely brutal. But let's see what happens in the game. Where are we at? Where are we at? So let's see. We got our knight L. Knight f5 happened. Okay, so knight f6 happens immediately in game. I lied. I didn't lie. Wait. No, hold on. Sorry. Queen f3 happens. I got ahead of myself. Queen f3 happens. Which is also fine. You activate the queen. It's just unnecessary because the queen's not going to do very much down this file anyway. But whatever. So be it. I guess here the idea is maybe like you take with the bishop. And then you take f7 here with the knight. And then you take on f6 maybe. I don't know. I think that bishop f5 immediately was like a super strong winning line. But we'll see. Crazy played that game really well from what I remember. Well, you can go back and watch my analysis of this if you want my opinion, Blows. Queen f3 happens, which is fine. Bishop e7 happens, defending the knight. Makes a lot of sense. Bishop wasn't doing much else other than defending h6. I mean, the advantage here is that you do defend the knight, but then you might think, okay, why not Frappuccino the bishop? Well, you cover up the diagonal, but then at the same time, you know, which might like allow you to recapture with a pawn here or something like that. But that poses a bit of an issue because then actually you cut off your queen from defending f6. You have to recapture with the bishop first if f6 is attacked, which is forced, by the way, if knight takes f6 happens. So actually, I feel like bishop e7 isn't better than the bishop Frappuccino here onto the traditional g7. Then again, bishop g7 also prevents your rook from seeing g6. I mean, don't get me wrong. This situation looks pretty bad for a black. But bishop e7 doesn't seem fantastic, but it was played in game. I mean, it's hard to say what the priority is. I mean, I guess you have to like pay attention to one place at a time. And it's not like, especially with this knight here, it's not like the plan is any longer to collapse directly onto g6, especially since the queen doesn't see it and this bishop doesn't see it. So actually, I think that bishop g7 was probably a better play. Let's see what happens next. Okay, once the queen is on f3 and the bishop is on e7, then Crazy decides, okay, now is my time to shine. Which is interesting. It's interesting that this happens after this diagonal is all closed up. Because now you can take one of these pieces with the pawn. You probably actually take... Then again, there's an issue because if you like... As black in this position... Okay, so you can take like this... And then like this situation happens and then this situation happens. Which is kind of spooky. Which is also why I recommended... Rook e8 like years in the past, by the way, just to get that defender onto f7, but I think all roads kind of lead to mate here, so it doesn't really matter that this order, like, you enjoy such positional advantage here as white that it doesn't matter that you waited for this to happen. Yeah, because you can't... Okay, so like what do you do here? Yeah, takes here and then takes f7 is a nightmare. On the other hand, if takes here, then takes here's a nightmare, right? Because it's check, it forks these pieces, it threatens mate here. So basically bishop recaptures is necessary because king here, which is the only other legal move, yeah, so takes here, knight takes f7. Takes here, knight takes f6. And king can't move, so basically bishop has to recapture here. And then you have like a check and a mate along this diagonal, because the diagonal is opened up, basically, something along those lines. So it looks like all roads lead to mate, so whatever. Okay, here, e takes f5 is the response of choice. So in this situation, this should be incredibly scary, right? Opening up that diagonal. Then again, you can't... Well, no, because if takes here, then this... You can't actually check with a knight that's 3 squares away, either in time or in space. So maybe it's not that big of a deal. But you can threaten like a mate that has to be responded to. You can't really with this knight. It's kind of tricky to do that. Let's see what happens in the game. Let's see how this mating sequence actually plays out. Okay, so e takes f5 happens, and then the knight f6 check happens, which I think already talked through this. Threatens mate here. King can't move here because then next turn it's, you know, this is mate because it's double check. Bishop takes here is basically your only legal move unless you want to like exile your king, but I think that that's also quite bad. So in any case, I think that bishop takes here is like the only play. And that opens up the diagonal, and that's super scary, right? Okay, fantastic. It's not clear how you close this diagonal immediately. But hey, whatever. Probably the best way forward is maybe queen out here, threaten a mate. No, that's not fantastic either. Probably want to move the knight immediately. Maybe it is to threaten this mate. Then queen here, then this propagates, and then you move this knight. And then what do you end up mating with? Because if there's a queen here, then you have to mate all the way back here, but then you have to get like a bishop or a queen back here. So the diagonal mate is not clear how you get the diagonal mate. This isn't the cleanest. This is why I would have preferred bishop f5 a turn before. I think that it makes a very big difference. Don't get me wrong. This still seems terrible for black. I mean, okay, I guess what you play for here is probably queen d5 threatening 2d mate that has to be responded to, and then you want to travel to this board 2 turns in the past because a queen here on this board loses, right? Or it wins for white. I think that's probably the play. Okay, so you have to take with the bishop here. It's basically your only legal move. Queen d5 is okay. So this conversion is very clean by crazy. This is fantastic. Okay, so you have to prevent mate in 2d mate in 1 on the board, right? Queen e5 also threatens soft mate travel. Yeah, that's what I meant. So you're playing for traveling back to this board in a turn. Is basically what you're doing. So that's fair enough. Again, not the cleanest, but that's just what happens. Okay, rook f8. I mean, you have to defend f7. This is basically one of 2 legal moves. I mean, I personally liked the one where you cover the diagonal immediately to like close the window. Like in theory, you can't travel right away, can you? You can. You can travel right away. That's fantastic. Although you don't want to travel right away because they can Jurassic. But actually, yeah, like if you look at where this queen travels to. Oh, then again, you can't actually Jurassic because that bishop was there for like the entire game. It didn't get frappuccinoed earlier. So a queen right here. It's pretty rough, man. Okay, so I mean, you either play your queen out or you play your rook out. I probably would have played my queen out just because, in theory, you want to prevent the propagation of the diagonal, you know, and like narrow the window as much as you can for your opponent, but whatever. I mean, there's no way to prevent that travel, right? It just can't be done. The travel that I just pointed out. So, unfortunate. Unfortunate for Los. This travel does actually, after rook f8, it happens immediately. We go back to t15, f7. Fantastic. Only thing that can happen, I mean, this is soft mate. That's rough. Lots of arrows to deal with. So, what is our response? Our response is a queen travel. The desperate queen travel. And as far back as it can go is a5. Which is fair enough. I mean, it couldn't have really gone further if you move the queen here. So, of the two moves, I think that rook f8 was probably better. The only issue here, so this sets up for this knight to be able to recapture. The only issue is that white has a check. This right here is check. This right here is check. Many roads lead to mate here. Let's see. Knight takes f6 happened. 2D check was Crazy's weapon of choice. Could have been 5D check, but listen, I don't judge. It's all good. We're approaching the end of the game here. Because it's 2D check, Los has the opportunity to make another timeline, which, by the way, he wouldn't have if you had done the 5D check. That's all I'm saying, but, you know, whatever. It's a matter of taste. Then king runs away, and finally we get this beautiful mating sequence. Although it does, yeah, okay, so this does check the only square that the king, maybe this is like the 5D, this is like the more Chad play, because you're telling your opponent, yeah, sure, you can run, but you can't hide, and that's exactly what we see here. So a fantastic conversion. Overall, I think well played by both players. I think that we saw a few inaccuracies earlier on in the game. I think that there were some tempo losses. 5D check. Yeah, exactly. We saw some tempo losses. I think we saw the importance of developing your pieces here. Rook b8 in particular seems like it really allowed white to get their attacks started. I think that we've learned some valuable lessons about elo privilege, and how just because your opponent's 200 elo higher than you doesn't mean that their attacks actually need to be respected. You just go up the piece here, but you know, that's all good. Other than that, though, it seemed clean. Again, I think that the bishop move earlier would have been just as lethal, but very well done because in terms of like the diagonal, it actually looked kind of sketch in terms of a conversion for white, but seeing that the travel onto f7 was there and actually has been there for quite a while, it's hard to tell because all the pieces around f7, f7 was so heavily defended here, but not actually by any piece other than the king, unfortunately. Maybe another lesson is play rook f8 as early as possible. Frappuccinoing that bishop was probably good. Then again, the collapse onto g6 would have happened. Then again, that's clearly not, that wasn't, even though this battery was prepared. Yeah. So in this situation, we also learned that g3, there were tempo losses on both sides. All right, g3 here seems sketch when you've got knight f3 or knight f4, which seems like quite lethal for this g6 pawn. But all in all, I think there was a really good game. I think that it was really well played. There weren't many, listen, you know that, let's get these arrows back up. I don't know why I did that. You know that you're playing high level 5D chess when like single move tempo losses result in massive capitalizations for the other player. And there are situations like that. That's what makes 5D chess so difficult to play, is that if you're playing against a skilled opponent, then like single move slip ups are absolutely fatal tactically. Um, and it's easy to see that in hindsight. You know, we have the benefit of like not being under time pressure and, you know, having the um, having the liberty to sort of like freely theorize um, and speculate on the position without having to put our elo where our mouth is, so to speak. Um, so I get that it's really tough to make those determinations, but it was a really well played game, I think, by both players. It came down to the wire, and it was a beautiful conversion. This was kind of like textbook play. This is how you play an E3 position. Maybe there was like one or two tempi that were given up sort of unnecessarily for crazy, but at the end of the day, I mean, this is the white player's game plan in these positions, and I think he did a fantastic job. So hats off, kudos. This was also, I mean, you could also consider this like a really interesting study of like a knight f3, knight f6, c4, c5 game. This sort of serves double duty. So very well played. Good stuff. All right. Thanks for submitting that game, Crazy. Sorry it took a few weeks to get to it, but I'm really glad that we did.